And welcome back to the OHIO podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Buckeye Boggs. That man over there wearing the same exact t-shirt as me, well, that's the Wild Man, Chris Wilds. No, we did not plan this. Great minds think alike.
We'll go with that.
You know, but we both have scarlet fever, and the only prescription is the OHIO podcast. The OG of t-shirts for the OHIO podcast. The original.
Yeah, season 2, actually, I think when these came out, weren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had these when we went on our trip to
Pittsburgh
for the first time. Anyways,
before we had a pod squad, Eric.
That's right, before the pod squad that's requesting merch all the time from us. Merch changes anyways, any ideas that they have. Chris, this is our last position group preview, and then we get to reveal the first and second team, all Big Ten from the OHIO podcast. Super excited about that. We held quarterbacks till the end. We normally go first with that, but there's been so many question marks around the quarterback position in the Big Ten. And even though we are now just 30-some-odd days from the start of the season, there's still a lot of question marks around the Big Ten country about these quarterbacks. And to be honest with you, Chris, the rankings kind of show that. We were kind of all over the board. And so the consensus is a little murky. I think a lot of people are going to disagree a lot more with these lists than some of the other position groups that we've done and that we've had. Everybody disagrees usually with their player here or there, like he should be up higher, or and that's the homer and all of us coming out. And
right.
We don't make any qualms about the fact that we are Ohio State homers. And so we might view the Buckeyes a little bit better than maybe some other people around the country do. But for the most part, I think our lists are going to be much more accurate than some of the pundits out there who don't really pay attention to football outside of their own little ecosystem that they're in. And so I would take our list and I would put it up next to just about anybody's and say our list is pretty doggone spot on. And again, we take the consensus involved. So it's yours, mine, JR's, averaged it out, and voila, here it is. So that being said, are you ready to reveal the top 10 quarterbacks in the Big Ten heading into 2024?
The question is, are people ready to hear it? Because, man, it was rough. It was rough, Eric.
Indeed it was. And you'll see why. Here we go. Number 10. Let's start with Michigan State. Aiden Childs, the transfer from Oregon State. Statistically, it's not there. This is JR really believing in Aiden Childs a lot. 24 of 35 passing for 309 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions in his career or last season, 2023. Chris, you and I both had him unranked. We did not have him in our top 10s. JR had him at 6th, and that pushed him into the top 10.
I have no words here, Eric. I really don't. This is a severely overrated guy right here. I think Jonathan Smith will do great things at Michigan State. I think that Aiden Childs is going to help him get the ship started in that direction, but he's not a top 10 guy, not yet.
Well, if you feel that about this one, you're really going to feel that one about this one. Number 9 is Curtis Rourke from Indiana. Again, you and I had him unranked. JR had him up to 5th, and that pushed him to 9th on this list. The old Bobcat transfer right here, going over to Bloomington.
Yeah. Again, this guy was a very good MAC quarterback. That doesn't translate to the Big Ten, Eric. This guy is going to have struggles. I wish him the best because he is a kid that played at Ohio, but I just don't feel like he's a guy who's a top 10 caliber guy.
We're going to find out this season. I can find a handful of other guys who I think are better on this list. Number 8. Now, I think you're gonna be a little bit more happier with the direction we're about to go here. So number 8 is Max Brosmer, Again, another transfer, third one in a row. This one from New Hampshire to Minnesota. Now, he's got the stats to back this up. 291 of 455 for 3,459 yards last year. 29 touchdowns to 6 interceptions on the FBS level, however. Chris, you had him 8th. That's where he's ranked. JR had him 7th. I did not have him ranked. He ends up being the 8th ranked quarterback heading into this season in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I think if there was one of these guys who really is coming in from a program that I would consider, I don't want to say less than Eric, but at a lower level of competition, who has done it at a high enough level to make me take notice, it is Brosmer. He, set a lot of records last year playing for New Hampshire. May have even, we discussed on Sunday, broken a few records by one Ryan Day. But, I think that he has the talent. And I also think he's got a big advantage over the last two guys we talked about. One, PJ Fleck is a good offensive coach. Two, he has possibly one of the, if not the best lines in the Big Ten in front of him. I look for Brosmer to have a big year.
Also has one of the better wide receivers to throw to in the Big Ten. So, yes, keep that in mind. And I think he's going to have one of the better running games in the Big Ten to help out as well. Number 7, let's go over to Indiana again. However, we're going to go up a little bit to West Lafayette and talk about Hudson Card. He's a redshirt senior this year. Last year in 2023, 215 of 365 for 2,387 yards, 15 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions behind an offensive line that was absolutely decimated by injuries. The offensive line is going to be better. One more year in that offense. Hudson Card, I think, is going to surprise a lot of people this year. Chris, you and I both had him around about the same place. You had 6th, I had 7th. JR had him 10th. That's good enough to slot him in at 7th in the Big Ten coming into the 2024 season.
Yeah, I feel like that's about the right spot. 6, 7's about the right spot for this guy, given the production he's had. But like you said, Eric, he did not get a fair shake last season. He was playing behind a patchwork offensive line all last year. I look at this kid as somebody who could be a top 5 guy if the line is able to hold up for him.
All right, number 6. This is going to be super interesting for you, Chris. I think we reverse what JR does here, and I think this affects the ranking for one, Will Rogers. The transfer from Mississippi State, played in the SEC, has some really good numbers in the SEC. Now, a la under Mike Leach's offenses, air raid. Now he's going over to Washington, where he will be in his senior year be taking over Jed Fish's offense. 142 passing, 237 for 1626 last year in an injury-ridden junior season there at Mississippi State. 12 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Chris, you're super high on him. You had him at 3rd. I had him at 6th. JR had him unranked. That's how he ends up being at 6th.
I like Will Rogers a lot. I think that he's a very smart quarterback. I think he's a very talented quarterback. I don't know that he's as talented as, say, Bo Nix was last year, but I get a Bo Nix type feel off of this guy. He's put up big numbers in the past. He's in an offense that I think will suit him very well. Is he going to put up 5,000 yards passing? Absolutely not. Not in a Jed Fish offense, but what he could do is go out there and throw for 3,500 yards, 25 touchdowns against only 2 or 3 interceptions, have himself a good year and get himself in a good draft spot.
All right, time for the top 5. Let's go out to the land of cheese and talk about Tyler Van Dyke. Transfers into Wisconsin from Miami. Last year, as a junior, he had 219 completions on 333 attempts for 2,703 yards, 19 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. Doesn't look great, but I say go look at his numbers when he was a redshirt freshman for Miami, and that was actually the best year that Tyler Van Dyke had. Chris, you had him 7th. JR had him 9th. I think Tyler Van Dyke is sitting in an offense where he is going to thrive. I had him at 4th. he ends up being number 5 in the rankings heading into the season.
Yeah, I didn't feel he was top 5, but I'll tell you, Eric, I felt like he was somebody who could be. I'm with you. I think that he's going to do very well in that Longo offense. I just feel like you're right. He's in the right position to succeed. He's got a very smart coach and a very smart coordinator who's going to give him the opportunity to succeed. So I don't have an issue with him sliding in here.
All right, number 4 is probably maybe the second most controversial guy on this list. Let's go out to Los Angeles, Miller Moss of USC. Now, the numbers aren't great because he was sitting behind a Heisman candidate there in Los Angeles, but he was 46 of 65, 681 yards, 7 touchdowns, 1 interception. Of course, the bowl game was his coming out party where he looked phenomenal. He's had an entire offseason where he's the number 1 guy. He's QB1 in a Lincoln Riley offense. Lincoln Riley has produced plenty of NFL caliber quarterbacks in his time. Can Miller Moss be the next one? It's a very good possibility that could be the case. There's a little bit of projecting on our parts here. Chris, you had him 5th. JR had him 8th, it looks like, if I can see that right. And I had him 3rd. He ends up being 4th. That feels about right to me.
I'm not going to argue with it. I think he's a kid with great upside. Like you said, he's in the perfect offense with the perfect quarterback coach in Lincoln Riley, who's produced 3 Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks who I believe all went first in the draft. This is a great opportunity for Miller Moss. I thought the sample that we did see was good. But even if you go back and look at the numbers outside of the bowl game, overall, if you take his entire career as a sample size, he's completing 71% of his passes, Eric. That's huge. That's huge. The TD to interception ratio, very good, which tells me he's playing smart ball when he's in there. So I think that you're right. I think this guy's a top 5 guy by the end of the season. So I don't have a problem with this at all.
Okay. Let's go to number 3. If Miller Moss was controversial, this one is incredibly controversial. We're talking about Drew Aller at Penn State. 233 of 389 passing for 2,361 yards, 25 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He got ranked 4th by both JR and yourself, Chris. I have him at 5th. Out of all the returning quarterbacks, Hudson Card, Miller Moss, and Drew Aller, they're the only 3 in our top 10 who aren't transfers.
I think this guy's
Drew Aller is getting the nod. So, What do you think?
Here's the thing. I think, honestly, of the 3, he's probably the least talented. But this is the thing. Statistically, if you look at this just statistically, Eric, there's an argument that he should be number 1 on this list statistically. He went out last year just shy of 2,400 yards, had, I believe, over a 70% completion rating, 25 to 2 TD to interception ratio. What people don't understand is if you really look at the tape, watch how many times this guy's completion percentage was based on dump-offs. How many of his passes were 15 yards or less, and then a receiver turned it into a big gain with runs after catch?
Mm-hmm.
I think that this guy's incredibly overrated based on his stats. I will say that he did have one advantage over a lot of these guys that we've talked about, Eric, with the exception of Card, really, and that's the fact that he's actually played in the Big Ten. He knows the nature of the competition. He knows the physicality and the speed of the game in the Big Ten. A lot of these guys don't have that advantage. Will it help him? I don't know. But I do think that just based on that, he did deserve to be in the top 5.
Fair enough. All right, here we go. This is going to really ruffle some feathers, but it is what it is. Number 2 is Will Howard. 219 of 357 for 2,643 yards, 24 touchdowns. Look at that interception number, though, 10. Now, there's a reason for that. He was asked to do a lot at Kansas State with receivers who weren't getting a ton of separation, and he had to fit the football in the tight windows. And some of these interceptions are coming late in the game when they're just trying to make something happen late and they're trailing. So you can explain that away a little bit. What you can't explain away, however, is that this was his 2.5 full years being a starter, and his numbers actually dipped in 2023. So that's something else to keep your eye on slightly.
Where was the talent level at versus the 2 years as well?
I understand that, and I know that's the one argument that a lot of Ohio State fans are going to make is that look at this roster around him. He doesn't have to go out and win games like he did for K-State. He just has to manage the football game. But I'm here to tell you that is not in Ryan Day's DNA, to tell a quarterback to just manage games. We tried that last year. It didn't work so well for Honda McCord. I think Ryan Day's expecting Will Howard to look more like Dwayne Haskins did in his first year and only year as a starter under Ryan Day. Now, there is another advantage here. Will Howard's got some legs. He can run the read option. That's something we've not seen Ryan Day do since the days when he was running Urban Meyer's offense with J.T. Barrett as quarterback. And that's the comparison you like to make, Chris. And that's probably why you have him at first, where JR and I have him at second.
That's a big part of it, Eric. For me, I just think that versus the guy we're going to talk about at number 1, Eric, that I think the size of Will Howard is going to hold up much better to the physicality of the league. I think that he is going to be able to, like you said, get out, run the ball, extend plays. I think that he was hurt by a lot of bad talent last year and being put into some rough situations. But if you look at him versus ranked opponents, he really does kind of play at another level versus those ranked opponents. I mean, if you look at his game he had versus Texas last year, a team that was in the college football playoff, his team should have won that game. K-State should have won that game. He was on, and he played very well. And I think that's a difference between him and what we are going to see from the guy who's in the number 1 spot. So.
All right, and let's go ahead and talk about that guy in the number 1 spot. That would be Dillon Gabriel out of Oregon. Numbers were better at Oklahoma than Howard's were at Kansas State. That had a lot to do with this decision. 266, 384. Look at the yards, 3,660. Look at the touchdowns, 30. Look at the interceptions, 6. So just taking the statistics in this, Dillon Gabriel has better passing stats than Will Howard does. I think they're going to be playing in very similar offenses, and they're going to be expected to do very similar things. And so will there be more of a return to the mean and a lowering of Gabriel's and a raising of Howard? That's very well could be the possibility here. But you look at the talent around Dillon Gabriel, you look at the talent around Will Howard, it's comparable. I would say Ohio State might have a little bit more, but it is comparable. I will say the one big advantage that I think Dillon Gabriel has over Will Howard, and this is just me being completely open and honest, is I think Dillon Gabriel has a better offensive line on paper than Ohio State. Now, that doesn't mean that when we get into the season that's going to be the case, but on paper, I think Dillon Gabriel is going to have more time to throw the football, more time to make decisions.
I don't know that I disagree with that per se. And yes, you're right. His numbers last year were absolutely smurfy, Eric. So I'll tell you, my big knock on Gabriel is I don't think he's physical enough to handle the full Big Ten season. I think that he was in, and granted, Howard was too, but in a conference where honestly they don't play any defense. I think his offense last year was more geared towards passing versus what, I mean, yes, Will Howard had to pass last year, but I think that the offense was more geared towards the passing game at Oklahoma than it was at K-State. That I think was part of the reason for the increased statistics. But you know what? You're 100% right. I think these guys are going to be asked to do a lot of similar things. I think that talent-wise, Ohio State is much deeper. I think, if Oregon sustains any injury at all along that offensive front, I think Dylan Gabriel's in a lot of trouble because I don't think that he can handle the physical nature of this conference. I don't think he'll have as much luck versus the quality of cornerbacks that he's going to see in this conference. And honestly, if you look at the two side by side, I think that Gabriel, and this is going to go exactly directly towards what you said about them being asked to do similar things. I think Gabriel is a better game managing quarterback. I think that Will Howard actually gets the ball downfield better. But I will say this, Gabriel does, I think, read defenses fairly well. And while I had Howard at number one, you guys had him at two, I can see why you guys went with Gabriel at number one. I just don't think that Ducky Smurf is going to be able to survive the season.
And I do believe that Dan Lanning is made a plan B in case.
I agree. The kid from UCLA is a good talent with a similar skill set. And again, I think that the first 5 games of the season are going to be extremely important to both these quarterbacks because if they slip up at any point, if they would falter before they face off in game 5, or should one of them get blown out in game 5 and just look horrible, I really think you see their coach go to number 2. Because just like Lanning in Oregon, Ryan Day, in fact, better than Lanning in Oregon, Ryan Day has the most talented quarterback room in the country as a whole. When you're number 5 guy on that depth chart, and make no mistake about it, he is number 5, and I'm sorry for it, is an athlete like Lincoln Kienholz. I really feel like you're in pretty good shape. So don't be surprised if either of these guys slip up before they face off or if they get blown out in that game. I really look for the coach to make a move to number 2 because both these guys have a playoff to think about, Eric.
They do. So interestingly enough, that when you look at this list, only 3 quarterbacks aren't transfers. I think that has a lot to do with the mystery around how we're going to rank these guys. I think that has a lot to do with, I think, what's going to be kind of maybe a lackluster year in the Big Ten for quarterback play. Outside of maybe the top 4, and there's some questioning on that, maybe the top 5, because I think some of them might come back next year. Some can't. They're in their last year. 2, 3 guys get drafted on this list.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, you look at this, Eric, and what's even more telling, we talked about the nature of quarterback play in the Big Ten. You've got guys who are returning who are not on this list. Most notably, I mean, wasn't a starter last year, but you look at Michigan. They've got a second-year guy at quarterback in Alex Orji, who he got playing time last year. He's playing for the defending national champions, asterisks, and he is nowhere to be found on this list. You know, I think that's very telling about the nature of quarterback in the Big Ten right there. And you go further down, there are some other guys who are coming back who maybe weren't starters, but who have been on the roster for a while, who they just weren't good enough to make the cut in the top 10. And then you look at it, and I'm going to go back to Ohio State's locker room again. I think the two most talented quarterbacks in the league did not make this list because they're both freshmen in the Ohio State locker room. And we don't see them as being projected starters, so they weren't on the list. But I'm telling you right now, I think Julian Sayin and Aaron Nolan are both literally could be 1 and 2 on this list if they were starters. And I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
Right. Well, it's super interesting nonetheless, and it's something that I think we need to keep our eye on as we go through the season. You know, what's interesting is when you look at preseason rankings, and we've talked about this, Chris, you have to take into account what they've done. You have to take into account what's around them on the roster, and you have to take into account a little bit of projections. When you look at rankings at the end of the season, it's simply what they do.
Right.
Much more cut and dry, much more black and white.
Right.
There's a little bit more nuance involved in preseason rankings. There's a little bit more of a feelings or biases that come into account.
Sure.
But this argument for the quarterbacks is going to play itself out throughout the course of the season. Interestingly enough, there were some guys left off this list I can make an argument for that by the end of the season might be top 5 guys in the conference.
Mm-hmm.
There could be some injuries that happen, like you mentioned.
Well, I'll tell you, perfect example, the kid in Nebraska. I think this, we did not, was Dylan was not on the list, was he? He missed the cut.
Yeah.
That's a kid right there who's going to be starting. He's got an okay schedule, not favorable, but okay. I'm telling you, that's a guy who could he should be on the top 10. And a few things happen, he could be a guy that sneaks up towards the top 5 based on talent.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So please like, share, subscribe. It really does help the channel. If you've enjoyed all of these previews, by all means, let us know in the comments section below. Let us know what you think we got right, what you think we got wrong in the comments section below. We would like to hear from you. And if you haven't, go back and watch all the other position group previews that we've done. We started way back when, about a month and a half, about 2 months ago.
Actually, it was about 8 weeks ago, yeah.
Started 2 months ago. We started with running backs.
Running backs was the first one we did.
Yep, and we went back and forth from offense to defense until we got now down to the quarterbacks. And so we've done all the position groups minus special teams. We don't waste our time with that. But go back, check those out. That'll help you out when determining a lot of things going into the season, including betting and making predictions and just getting yourself prepared for the season. I think you'll enjoy a lot of those. Let us know, like I said, what you think. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, get notified. If you're not already, please subscribe. Really does help the channel. Till next time, Chris, OH.
IO.
Go Bucks.